A lot of people, when they use the word I love you, what they really mean is, when I'm around you, I love myself very much. We are human beings, and healthy love means healthy sense of self. The more you know yourself as a person, the more you can make space for somebody else. Even though this person may be saying something that doesn't sound right to them or they don't like, this person isn't a bad person, is not even trying to be a bad person.
Welcome to the Jewish Marriage Podcast, your home for unique, insightful conversations about all things Jewish dating and marriage. I'm your host, Yisrael Glick, and today I am excited and honored to welcome back our guest for this episode, Dr. Shagalow, Dr. Yosef Shagalow, licensed practicing therapist, doctor of psychology, also rabbi. We had a really insightful conversation last time we spoke, mostly about dating and navigating that and making the most of that, doing the best we can to set ourselves up for the highest likelihood of the most successful marriage. So today, I want to focus more on the marriage once we get there. Once we've gotten to that stage, I want to talk about marriage itself. Now, I think any real conversation about marriage is going to have to touch on this. It's got to be I'd say the number one word, I assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that people would associate with marriage, which is love. Love is maybe a very loaded word, and it means a lot of things. And I feel like maybe it means so many things and so much that it gets to the point where it could almost not mean much of anything at all. And I'd love to get your insight into very practically and tangibly, what is love? How does love work, and what is the role of love in marriage?
That's a very good question. I'm going to have to think about that to answer that. I think love means different things at different times in a person's relationship. In the beginning, I think love means strong infatuation, seeing somebody, hoping, having tremendous amount of hope, feeling very close towards that person, loving them, in other words, having a feeling, being drawn towards them, wanting to share your life with that person. I think that's how love begins. Maybe call that infatuation as you get older. I think as time goes by, love develops and it matures like anything else. And as love matures, it has a lot of more deeper tones to it. And then I think that love means feeling of commitment, feeling of caring for somebody, feeling of wanting to share the rest of your life with that person. What other things could love mean to a person as they get older? Means feeling totally dedicated to this person and recognizing that this person is bringing out the best of you and you want to do everything for them. But not only because of what they do for you, which I think is what it starts out to be, but I think it's also to do it for them. So love can be, I love this person, I am going to want to do what's best for them. I think unfortunately that's one thing I see for a lot of people when they use the word I love you, what they really mean is, when I'm around you, I love myself very much. And as long as you help me love me, then I love you too. So love is really a reflection of how much I love myself and how much you make me feel good about myself. But I think as we get older and I think as we mature, love is really seeing somebody, appreciating them, recognizing them, and wanting to do what they want for themselves, wanting to be there and willing to sacrifice, even if it makes me uncomfortable, even if maybe I won't get what I want out of this relationship, but I love this person, so I'm going to do it. We see that a lot in parents who love their children.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, I think when parents love their children, we see a deep love, which is sometimes having to do something which goes totally against them. I may love somebody, so I might forgive them for certain things which I know are harmful or may have been harmful to me. But I love them, so I'm willing to look past it, look past a specific incident or a specific thing which has occurred, and recognize that deep inside, this person means a lot to me. I value them, even though a specific thing they do I cannot understand or it makes no sense to me. But overall, my attachment and my closeness to them goes so deep that I'm willing to overlook that fault. And I'm willing to bear that fault, not pretend that that fault doesn't exist, but I know it's there, but I love them anyway. And I love them and I'm willing to live with them with that fault. And so my job in that case is not necessarily to pretend that that doesn't exist, but to figure out a way to live with this person, even when that thing is going on.
Mm-hmm. So let's say down the line, 30, 40 years into a strong, healthy, fulfilling marriage, the love becomes much less about oneself and much more of, let's say, a genuine love and concern and care for the spouse, for the other person themselves, rather than, I really enjoy being in your presence and therefore I want to be close to you, right?
Yes.
So, but by the sound of things, would you say that it's fair to say that at the beginning of a relationship, it's just not realistic to expect that? And the reality of a relationship is that early on, there is going to be a lot of seeking closeness for the pleasure it brings oneself. And there's no way around the fact that it takes time to develop that depth of connection where it just becomes about the other person.
Absolutely. That's very true. This is a developmental concept which people growing into mature love. It takes a long while for a person to realize that I love this person loves me, and even though we differ or we have fundamentally different views, or this person has certain parts of them which I totally cannot understand or don't even appreciate, but I love this person anyway. I care about this person because I know how much they care about me. And so I'm willing to tolerate some of those things also. I see this a lot in relationships, work with a lot of people who've probably got married for the second time and struggle over the other person's personality because something they do doesn't make sense to them. And they're trying to change the other person in a way to make sense to them. And what they can't do is they don't have a history of trust to know that even though this person may be saying something which doesn't fit for them, doesn't sound right to them, or they don't like, this person isn't a bad person, is not even trying to be a bad person. But they're so caught up in this person is saying something to me which hurts me, which I don't like, and that's all they can hold on to, instead of realizing this person is with you, this person is caring about you. In every other way, this person loves you. Can't you look past this piece, which is hard for you to understand, and say, I respect this person. I trust this person, that from their perspective, they're not trying to hurt me. Even if I'm feeling hurt, this person is not trying to hurt me. Now, obviously, you would want each person to respect the other and to recognize it. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes people do things in a relationship which hurts the other person. And if we're going to focus on each one of these, instead of respecting and caring about the other person, recognizing that some people are going to have their faults, we won't be able to continue that relationship properly. There's got to be a certain amount of forgiveness in relationships for relationships to work. There cannot be just the assumption that two people love each other. When we say two people love each other, you're looking to see the love all the time. You're looking to feel the love all the time, which means you're always looking to feel validated. You're always looking to feel reassured. That won't always happen. Things happen in life where people have different opinions and different views of things and disagree about some fundamental differences. And sometimes those differences go very, very deep about very core issues. But people who truly love each other and truly respect each other are able to put a healthy fence around that issue so that issue doesn't poison the rest of their marriage. But that does take experience. That does, like you said earlier, that takes history. And that history is, has that person been there for me? Is this person there for me when I need them? Does this person have their back? Does that person have my back? And when you get to see that, yes, this person has my back, this person cares about me, they're there for me in times of need, you realize that even though they have a limitation, or what seems to you as a limitation, or disagree fundamentally with you on an issue, doesn't mean they can't care about you. And it doesn't mean you can't care about them. You can love them very dearly and have a great relationship. And by the way, this is not something I'm saying. John Gottman talks about this a lot. John Gottman is a famous couples therapist. And he talks about this, about healthy relationships and healthy couples is not that they don't disagree. The fact that couples don't disagree is not a sign of a healthy relationship. Sometimes it's actually the sign of an unhealthy relationship because the two are working so hard not to disagree because a disagreement will blow the relationship apart. A healthy relationship.
So it's a sign of insufficient, let's say, comfort
That's
to
right.
be able to engage in a disagreement respectfully.
That's exactly right. There's this fear that if we disagree, this relationship will blow up. There's not enough strength in this relationship to handle a disagreement, to handle a bad or even a nasty fight. And I'm not suggesting there should be a nasty fight in marriage, but sometimes, unfortunately, there are. But couples have the ability to forgive, and that's the concept of respect, respecting the other person. There may not always be the feeling of love right there, but there's the feeling of respect. This person is entitled to have a different opinion than I am. This person is entitled to have different outlook than I am, and we can still respect this person.
Would it be true to say then that respect and love really can feed into and nourish each other, and that as one feels more of a connection and love to the person they're sharing the life with, the person they're in this relationship with, that will lead them to respect that person and their independence more? And at the same time, the more we respect our partner, our spouse, and their independence and who they are, that will also feed to the sense of connection we have when the two people feel respected. That will feed into the love will feed back into the respect, and they both sort of feed each other.
Absolutely. In a healthy marriage, that's the way it works. Different marriages work slightly differently, but the fundamentals are often the same. A healthy marriage has to have both healthy separation and has to have healthy connection. And to nurture the connection, there has to also be separation. Each spouse needs to feel that they can develop in the way they need to develop so that they can come together in a healthy way. If the commitment of the marriage only is for the marriage itself, but doesn't allow for the two individuals to grow as unique individuals, the marriage will often implode because of that, because it doesn't allow for two people to get together who are nourishing the relationship with two different identities. What ends up happening is two people are just melding into one person. That's not a relationship. That's a symbiotic, two people becoming one.
So the greater the extent to which they are two healthy people, the greater the extent to which they can have that connection.
They can have a healthy connection, that's right. And often people will start off a relationship believing, and that's, again, this developmental, will start off a relationship trying to become one, and that's because what they're first trying to do is to unite, is to connect. And so it feels like they're becoming one. But there comes a point in the marriage where two people recognize that they've got to figure out who they are, and the marriage has got to make enough space for each one of them to find their way within the context of the marriage. And that's the second phase or the third phase of a healthy marriage. But that is the importance, and that's when both love and respect come to play in a very strong way.
So let's say early on in a marriage, someone's at the beginning of their marriage relatively early on, right? And we talked about how over time, the connection and the love can become much deeper, much more complex, more fully developed, and really more focused on the other person, right? And I guess ideally over time, each person's more focused on their spouse. And you have two people each caring about the other person more than they care about themselves. Are there specific things that people should be, let's say, working on, looking out for, making a specific effort in early on to get things moving in that direction? What are the things people should work on and put effort in early on, and I guess throughout their marriage, to keep things moving in that direction, in the direction of healthy development of that connection, so that it gets there over time to that love that's more focused on the other person and ultimately more fulfilling?
So I think first, that's a good question. I would think that one way to do that is, first of all, people, as they listen more in their relationship, learn to listen, to hear the other person's views, hear the other person's interests. I think it's important in a relationship that people become interested in the other person's interests simply to allow the other person to develop. And a relationship where one person is trying to get the other person one spouse, one partner is trying to get the other partner just to do things their way. In the end, that might happen, but that doesn't make for a healthy relationship. It makes for a dictatorial relationship, even if the two people don't realize that's happening. Those kind of relationships go through a lot of suffering and a lot of pain, because at some point it becomes too overwhelming. One person has lost their identity, and the other person, who actually is the powerful person in the relationship, ends up losing interest in the relationship. Because why would they want to be married to somebody? Why would they want to be in a relationship with somebody who's just a yes person, saying yes to them all the time, and has become totally lost in this relationship? And unfortunately, that relationship becomes abusive, sometimes because of that. Somebody has lost their entire sense of themselves in a relationship, and the other person starts to lose interest in the other person because of the way they have, personally, the way they have treated them, number one, but also because it's not another person they're dealing with. They're just dealing with a negative.
It's almost like the spouse is disintegrated.
Yes, the other spouse is disintegrated. It's a good way to say that.
It's almost like there's a self-interest and a selfish value in respecting your spouse, because the more you respect your spouse, the more of a spouse you have to love and to feel connected to.
Absolutely. I don't know if I would call that selfish, but that's realistic. We are human beings, and healthy love means healthy sense of self and healthy self-value. The other idea is the recognition that people have to, the more you develop your own interests, and the more you are stronger as a person, and you know yourself as a person and what's important to you, the more you can make space for somebody else. And I think that couples need to do that. They need to recognize that, yes, big part of the first part of marriage is the two people getting together and creating a bubble around themselves and falling in love, and sometimes even keeping other people out of their lives. But that's not healthy in the long run. In the long run, each person, a husband, a wife, need to have a group of friends who they can be nurtured, who can nurture them and can support them and have their own interests and bring those interests into the relationship and have those interests respected by the other person.
Is it necessarily important? Is it technically necessary that those things have to involve other people? Is it possible, let's say that there are, there's a couple, two people are married to each other, and they happen to really share interests and recreation and hobbies and all of those things, and they can do all of those things together because it works, not because they're doing it for the sake of doing it, but because it just happens to work?
Absolutely. If it works for them, and if it really does work for them, and they're not sacrificing themselves, two people love each other and they've got a lot of common interests, that's great. It's a perfect relationship if that can happen. But that doesn't have to be the case for a good marriage to work. And I would believe that even in a relationship like that, you'll find he might sit down at night and enjoy classical music, and she likes to read a good book on her own. He likes to watch one TV show. She likes to do something else. And they've got some interests which identify them as individuals, not only physically that they're different people, but emotionally and spiritually, they've got their own interests, and which nurtures them as individuals, so that later on when they come together, they're respected. Not just because I'm respecting myself, but I'm actually respecting somebody else who's contributing to this marriage, something which I don't have.
Right. So,
not just in terms of a job which they can do for me, not just in something they can give me, but recognizing and valuing somebody else's interest, somebody else's input.
Right. And it's almost like, it seems a little bit, I don't know, maybe ironic is the right word, that this sort of, it's almost like a catch-22 where the acknowledgement and respect for the fact that the second person is a separate individual with their own interests and their own personality, ultimately, again, will reinforce the love that you have for that person, because ultimately, right, we didn't commit to marry ourselves, we commit to marry someone else.
Right.
And the greater the extent to which the two people enable their spouse to be that person that they committed to share their life with, the greater the extent to which they'll be sharing their life with that person.
I think that's true. I think that practically speaking, what this means is that we can call it sacrifice, but there's making space for somebody else. We make space for other people in a relationship. Marriage is not just going to be about getting what you want. Sometimes you won't get what you want. Sometimes you'll be uncomfortable because you have to make space for somebody else. Sometimes you're going to have to go somewhere or go on a vacation somewhere where it may not be your first choice. It may be decorating your home where one person wants the kitchen this way, the other person, library, wants the dining room a different way. And it may not be to your liking at all, but you recognize this is what that person needs. This is the way this person will be able to develop, will be able to feel comfortable. And so you compromise and you say, you know what, I love this person. I'm going to make space for this person. And in return, usually the other person does the same thing back. Right. Makes the space for you too.
So, and would it be true to say that that's the experience of that, let's call it sacrifice or making space, is one of the things that's really going to evolve and change throughout the course of a relationship, where perhaps at the beginning it feels more like a sacrifice, right? Early on in a relationship, it's like, well, I really don't want to do this, but I'm in a relationship, I'm sharing my life with this person, so I have to make space, I have to sacrifice for them. And perhaps over time, a decade or two down the road, a few years down the road, whatever it is, it might start not even to feel like such a big sacrifice so much as, oh, this is what my spouse, my partner, the person I love wants. And even though it's not what I would choose for myself, I'm happy to do it because it's what they want.
Well, interestingly, the way you bring that up, you would intuitively think that was the way it works. But I actually notice it doesn't work that way. It actually works slightly differently. And that is that in the beginning of a relationship, when two people fall in love, at least if that's the way it works, two people become enamored by one another, they tend to be very ready to give up. In the beginning of a relationship, people sacrifice very quickly and very easily. And what you find is because there's a lot of trust and hope functioning in this relationship. And that's, thank God that God has given us this attraction to one another. And what ends up happening is, yeah, I'm willing to do everything for this person. There's a lot of hope, which is running in this marriage, which is driving this marriage. And then after a while, for some people, it's unfortunately 6 months. For other people, it can be a couple of years. Then trust starts to bring skepticism, starts to turn to skepticism, and maybe fear. Or maybe not skepticism, that may be the wrong word, but fear. That maybe if I give this person, what will I get back? And unfortunately, that's when people start to say, wait a minute, I'm giving too much, or I'm not getting back in return. And fear comes into the relationship. And when fear comes into a relationship, we're waiting for the other person too much to give and to show that I can love them. I'm looking for them to prove to me how much they love me. I'm looking for that instead of trusting that what I put into this relationship, I'm going to get back. And once fear enters the mix, it's interesting, which happens is when one person starts to change love into fear, the other person does the same thing in return.
So if someone finds themselves with this shift happening in their relationship, what do they do? Where should they go?
Well, I think it is a typical, and it's actually I'm not the only one who says this is well known. What I'm talking about is well-known phases in a marriage. That yes, there comes a time when there's a transition in the relationship, and people reevaluate the relationship, and I think that's what a committed relationship is about. In a committed relationship, there's an overall commitment, like a brit, like a covenant. And the covenant is the overall structure of the relationship, which says to people, we are in this relationship. We are going to make this work. We're committed to make this work.
So it's almost like that's where the real relationship actually starts.
Yes. The real relationship starts every time you go through one of these transformational times in your relationship when there's a difficulty and you come out of it and you're still together. Because you ultimately say, I'm afraid but I'm going to trust this relationship. Well, those steps of trust are what really create the power of a relationship, the endurance of a relationship. Difficult times happen. The other person is there for you. You go through difficult times in a relationship and you survive those times. Those things remind each other that this person has my back. This person really cares about me. And therefore I love them dearly because I know how much they're really there for me. The ingredient in a healthy relationship is to trust somebody. And to trust somebody doesn't mean that there's a reason to trust them. To trust them is to put out trust, to say, I believe in this person that they will be there for me. And usually with trust, you kind of get trust back. When you plant trust, you reap trust back. Usually in a typical healthy relationship.
I think it's something that I find a lot with children. It's also when you give trust, the trust can actually create the thing that you're trusting in them to do.
Absolutely right. When I hear the parent saying to me, I can't trust my child, I go, of course you can't trust your child. Trust is something you teach. Trust is not something you gain. You trust. You trust a child. You teach a child trust. You say to a child, you practice trust with a child. You say to a child, can you do this for me? And when they do it, they say, wow, you did that for me. That's great. And what the child learns, that following through in something and fulfilling a job, fulfilling a role, is something which parents appreciate and respect and value, and he feels valued for that thing. And when a child feels valued because he was trusted, he wants you to trust him again, and he tries again to trust. When children are not trusted and say, I don't trust you, the child doesn't even know that trust is something he can have. He doesn't even know how to do it, doesn't know what it feels like. And so what that child is going to do is going to grow up feeling, I cannot be trusted. That's what happens. To teach trust, we can't just experience trust. And if we don't see trust in children, doesn't mean we've done anything wrong, but it might be we have to step back a bit and give them small opportunities to show us trust so that we can reinforce that trust in them.
So in a marriage, trust might be something that I think, by the sound of things, a lot of people could probably do well to reframe from, because people will often say trust has to be earned, right? And maybe in a transactional relationship, in a business relationship, that's true. Whereas in a personal relationship, in a marriage, it sounds like it might almost be the opposite, that I don't know if I'd say you have to, but you should give that trust, and that will almost like earn itself. Yes. When you trust the person, that is going to increase the likelihood that they will reciprocate in a way that they end up deserving that trust.
Overall, that is correct. It is different when there's been a serious violation of trust. When there's been a serious violation of trust, it's just not fair to ask one partner to have to bear full responsibility of trust, which is the person who's been violated. That person who's been violated may love their partner dearly, but they've been violated and they feel scared. And I think in cases like that, it's very important. We know that in the cases of affairs, in case of other kind of cheating, other kind of betrayals which have happened, which are very clear betrayals, it is important for that person who has done the betrayal to recognize that, yes, it's their job to work hard to regain their trust. And no, forgiveness is not the answer. Trust is something which they're going to have to work on over and over again. And they're going to have to recognize, I hurt this person. I broke their trust.
I've made it hard for them to trust me.
I've made it hard. They love me, but they don't trust me. They're violated. They're standing in fear that this might happen again. My job is to understand that their fear is not distrust and they're not loving me. I need to recognize that that distrust is really insecurity. That's like they're being re-exposed to something. I'm re-violating them again. My job is then to be able to, through my behavior, through my actions, to be able to show them that they can trust me again. So that's different. In cases of very clear betrayal, it is different. I am talking about in the beginning of a relationship and through a relationship. Trust is something which you work on and you develop and you grow. You give, and by giving it, you get it. And that's the reason why we love somebody, because they bring out the best in us. They trust us. They believe in us. That's why we marry somebody. That's why we fall in love with somebody, because they see the best in us. Could you imagine falling in love with somebody who doesn't see the best in us, who's waiting for us to prove ourselves? That wouldn't work. The reason why we do fall in love is because there's the feeling this person trusts me. He's seeing me in the best possible light. And so, yes, as we continue to see someone in the best possible light, we bring out the best part of them.
So you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how when things come up, an issue, a disagreement, a conflict, things like that, right? And then as a couple works through the conflict and they come out on the other side, those are the experiences that really give the complexity and depth and increase the strength of the bond and the connection, etc. Does that mean then that, let's say, early on in a marriage, relatively, maybe it's, as reality setting in this honeymoon phase of where everything just seems amazing is starting to wear off, and, a couple's maybe experiencing a conflict for the first time, or maybe not for the first time, if they can approach the conflict and instead of just looking at it as this is something that's upsetting me, but to look at it as with the recognition and appreciation of the fact that this is an event that will, once we work through it, end up contributing to the further strengthening and deepening of our connection and bond. Would you say that reframing in that way can contribute towards a healthier resolution and a smoother resolution of the conflict?
I think so. And I think that, I think so. I think what you're saying makes sense. I think it's true. I think that often in couples therapy, what we do is, it's not helpful to try and resolve the actual conflict which is going on and trying to have them both agree about something, but rather set the conflict aside and show them that there is a love which is deeper than just that conflict, that they care for each other. So we might even prescribe them to, instead of solving the conflict, let the conflict aside and focus on relationship building activities. Take a vacation together, go out together, do things which you do like together to see that there really is strong feelings for each other.
And then that'll enable them to maybe step beyond the conflict.
It may step beyond the conflict, step around the conflict, absolutely. Because they recognize that this conflict doesn't have to overwhelm the relationship.
And I guess once they get to that point, that will almost automatically put them in a position where they're actually better predisposed to resolve the conflict, because they're going to have more of the respect, more of the mutual appreciation, etc., which is the foundation of
I don't know if it's about resolving the conflict, because I don't always want to. We don't always want to resolve
not every
the
conflict. Needs
and
to
you
be
can't,
resolved.
not every conflict, not every difference needs to be resolved. People will have fundamental differences, even in a relationship, which goes to the other myth. That the myth is that for people to be happily married, they have to agree on fundamental things. Well, there's some fundamental things they have to agree on, like where they're going to go on vacation. Can't have two people go on the same vacation to different places. But they've got to have some things which they agree on, but there's sometimes big issues which they differ on, and they can still be together.
And so I noticed that you shifted there from the word conflict to disagreement, which perhaps in and of itself is maybe the insight that not every disagreement needs to be overcome and do they need to end up agreeing, but perhaps would you say the objective is to make that disagreement no longer be a point of conflict between the people?
Yes, very true. Well, let's agree to disagree instead of having the myth that there's something wrong with our relationship because we disagree about something. I think it's the same thing with parenting. People parent differently. They don't parent exactly the same, and sometimes parent very differently. And sometimes that's a point of contention and it becomes a conflict. it shouldn't become a conflict. Parenting differently and having different views of parenting can often be just the result of personality. Somebody who's more passive might have a passive style of parenting. Somebody who's more assertive might have a more assertive type of parenting. The point there is not that both parent in the same way or even do the same thing, but they support each other in the way the other person parents instead of criticizing the other person because it doesn't look like what I think parenting should look like. I think that's fundamentally very important. I must tell you that was in my own personal relationship, my own personal marriage. I think that was a awakening that I'm going to see somebody parent in an entirely different way than I parent, or in the way I believe I should parent because of my own injuries or because of my own dreams or because of my own fears. There's somebody else in this relationship who's parenting because of their dreams and because of their fears, and they're going to be entirely different than mine. And our children are going to be okay. Kids are resilient. They can deal with two parenting styles. It's going to be hard to raise children with absolutely different values, at least, but not with different styles, not personality styles. Couples which have different goals can sometimes be very difficult to raise children if there's different goals, because children are not going to know where to go. But
So at that point, it becomes almost a different value in terms of what's important, and they're trying to push things in different directions.
And I use the term goals because it's the direction in which you're taking this ship, the direction in which you're taking this marriage. But people have different values about parenting, which don't necessarily interfere with people's goals. We think
Right.
they do, but they don't.
And so you mentioned there, as long as there is no criticism.
Yes.
How important, or is it important, and if yes, how important is it to avoid criticism in front of children, between parents?
There's nothing wrong with parents arguing with each other. In other words, disagreeing with each other. Because as we've spoken before, agreeing to disagree is a healthy part of life. We can disagree with other people. I can disagree with somebody vehemently about an issue, but we still care about each other. We still respect. We're having a discussion about something. I may be liberal, they may be conservative, and we're having a discussion. Children watch this and they learn, wow, people can agree to disagree. And it's wonderful. Families arguing about stuff at the dinner table. They're loud, there's disagreeing, maybe sometimes getting a little inappropriate. But what they're seeing is that there's an aura of respect going on with this. Criticism is something else. Criticism is not disagreeing. Criticism is putting somebody down and making somebody feel that they're not good enough because of something they're doing. And that's hurtful. That's not arguing. That's not having a different position. That's breaking somebody down. My experience is that children are more affected by watching their parents criticize each other and hurt each other than they are by being hurt themselves. Because when a child is hurt by himself, he goes to his room and cries. And by the way, I do not agree with violence at all, with hurting a child ever. But I often hear parents saying this: I cannot tolerate my spouse doing this to my child, hurting my child, or hurting them emotionally. And I'm going to stop them from doing it. And so I am going to criticize them, or I'm going to get in the middle of this so that they shouldn't do it. Now, in certain extreme situations, that makes sense. But in most situations, it is more hurtful for the child to create that criticism, to create that conflict between the two parents, than the concern you have that your child might be affected by the fact that one of the parents may have been reacting to the child in a way which you didn't like, which you didn't think was fair, or which was hurtful. They are more hurt by watching their parents' marriage. What they are seeing is their parents' marriage becoming fragile or becoming blowing up, and they're worried about, are my parents going to get divorced, than they are about their own pain.
Right. But so really, ultimately, children aside, criticism in a negative way, let's say destructive criticism as opposed to constructive feedback or constructive criticism, is something that is always, by the sound of things in any relationship, something that should be avoided. I don't know, maybe at all costs is pushing it, but very strongly.
Always. If you want to criticize, if you have something that you don't understand, ask a question.
And disagreement is fine as long as the disagreement is done in a way that's respectful rather than putting the person down.
Another person feeling put down. Unfortunately, sometimes you cannot necessarily see that on your own. I don't know always that I can tell that what I'm doing is criticism versus just asking a question. But I think we need to be sensitive to those things. When you're in a relationship long enough and somebody says to you, this really hurts me, you back away. Doesn't matter whether you feel like you didn't try to hurt that person or not. Doesn't matter. If that person feels hurt, back away. Apologize. Say, I'm sorry, because it hurts. You're in a marriage for 10, 15 years, or even 2 years, and the person says to you, this is really hurting me. Respect that. The fact that you didn't intend it has really nothing to do with it. But I think that's also important for both people to recognize that if you got hurt, doesn't mean that that person meant to hurt you. And that's a big piece about respect. Recognizing somebody can say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, and back off. The person apologizes, and as they make an effort not to do that again, or make an effort to show that they've taken influence about that thing, then you can recognize that this person is serious.
Okay. So I want to go maybe a little more specific. Let's say someone's, married again, however long it is, it's 6 months, it's 3 years, and they encounter something maybe that they really didn't expect, something unexpected, something that shocks them. It may be somewhat minor. It may be a very big skeleton in the closet of this person that they've committed to sharing the rest of their life with that they had no idea about and didn't see coming. What does a person do when something like that shows up?
I think that's a question of what is a person ready to do. I don't know that there's one answer for that. I think people find out things in a relationship which are very hurtful later on, or something they didn't expect, they didn't realize, they thought was important for them to know. Maybe the other partner intentionally didn't tell them, or maybe the other partner didn't realize that they needed to tell them, and they just find it out. It's a question of what they can tolerate. I think the question is what happens. That's what a big part of what forgiveness is about. Can I forgive this person? Can I overlook it? Is the person willing to? I think it goes both ways. One person has to forgive, and the other person has to recognize how much that was hurtful and be able to make amends in some way, or show up in some way. Now, how would that work in practicality? That's a good question. But I think it's similar to what we said before. If the person said, well, you never told me that. The person said, I didn't know that was something I needed to tell you. Well, now you know that that's something which is very sensitive to them. Are you capable of now showing that you're going to be more open about those things in the future?
So would you say that perhaps really what it boils down to is maybe like an evaluation of, okay, so this is what this person means to me. Here's something that's come up. Now I need to ask myself which one holds more weight, right? Is my appreciation for this person, my commitment to this person strong enough that I can be prepared to overlook or to accept or to work through this?
I think people who are in a traditional marriage, and I'm speaking here more as a rabbi than anything else, that's what we call a marriage a commitment. We call marriage a brit, a covenant between two people, because sometimes really hurtful things happen in a relationship, and it is the covenant of marriage which holds it together until they can overcome that difficulty. If one partner is not willing to do their part of the work to overcome the difficulty, that's a sign this is an unhealthy relationship. That kind of relationship doesn't need to continue. When somebody continues to violate a relationship or violate the trust of somebody else, that means it's an unhealthy relationship. There has to be the sense that the person recognizes that there's pain over here and they're willing to do something about it. Whether it's their fault or it's not their fault, it doesn't matter. Just it matters is this really hurting somebody else? And if it's really hurting somebody else, how am I going to adjust to that? Today, I may be the stronger one, and I'm more capable to forgive and to let go and to tend to somebody else's hurt. And hopefully tomorrow it'll be the other way around.
Okay.
And practically in relationships, very interesting fact I once heard about relationships is when you ask couples, happily married couples, who is sacrificing more for the relationship. I don't remember where I saw this, but who is sacrificing more for the relationship? You or the other person? And so the assumption is that in happy couples, people would say the other person is sacrificing more, but it's not true. In happy couples, people say, I am sacrificing more, but it's worth it. Because they are going into the relationship with the notion that I am willing to give for this relationship.
So it comes back to what we said much earlier, that when the connection is sufficiently robust, strong, developed, there doesn't need to be a denial of imperfections, etc., because we can be comfortable with them.
They could be comfortable with them. And so people say, no, of course, in many relationships, people will recognize that the other person is giving more, be thankful, but just because one person says, I'm giving more in this relationship, what they're really saying is, I notice I'm giving more in this relationship. I don't see when the other person is giving all the time.
Which is probably natural to a degree.
Yes, I think it's natural. I think that's why the person is really willing to give that much, because deep inside, they're seeing the other person is giving something back just as much.
So at a lower scale, let's say, things come up, and this is inevitable, right? In any long-term relationship, any relationship that goes for more than 15 minutes, something's going to come up that's frustrating, something's going to come up that's disappointing. And let's say we're not talking at the scale of things that really need to be evaluated. Do they outweigh the strength of the bond, etc., but just simple basic things. Are there techniques, skills that people can work on, specific ways that people, or things that people can keep in mind to get through, to manage that frustration, disappointment in a way that's perhaps the most healthy and going to have the least, introduce the least bumps into the road?
That's a good question. A couple of things I have noticed when I work with couples, which is very important. Number one, apologizing is a very important human skill. The ability to apologize, or the ability to say you're sorry, is very important. When you say you're sorry, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're culpable. It's not like, forgive me, I did something terrible. Forgive me, I did something terrible is a culpability. It is my fault. I am responsible for this mess up.
And that's why you shifted from apologize to sorry,
That's
right?
correct. Sorry
when you say
means,
to someone that you're sorry that they experienced a tragedy, doesn't mean that you killed the person.
That's correct. Exactly. Or I'm sorry that I forgot to pick you up. I'm sorry that I came late. I am sorry that I came late because you had to wait for me. And it was painful that you had to wait for me. But it's not my fault. So
it may not be your fault.
Correct. Correct. That's quite true. It may not be my fault. Sometimes it is. So then it's when you need to apologize, when it is your fault. But it's important to learn that it doesn't have to be your fault to apologize, to say sorry. Sorry is just a way of acknowledging that the other person is seriously in pain. And I think some of us are so caught up in defensiveness that we are afraid to say, I'm sorry. If somebody says, oh man, you were so late. You were 20 minutes late. I had to stand here all by myself. And instead of going, oh no, 20 minutes all by yourself, not sure, I am so sorry that I'm 20 minutes late, the person goes, it wasn't my fault. I couldn't help it that the train was late. So the poor person is standing there, had to stand in the rain, and I can't recognize any of that because all I want to do is defend the fact that it wasn't my fault.
And really what it boils down to there is, who are you thinking about, right?
Exactly.
Because they might both be true, but the question is the thing that comes to mind for me, well, it's not my fault, so don't be upset at me, or is the thing that comes to mind, may not be my fault, but I'm so sorry that this happened.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly what it's about, is learning that, yes, You may feel attacked. You may be being attacked. You may be being attacked at that moment, but try and get out of yourself for a while and try and put yourself in the other person's shoes for a moment and just be aware. Don't worry about whether it was or wasn't your fault, and don't worry about yourself. Try to think for a moment, leave me out of it. What is the other person experiencing? What is the other person thinking? What the other person is feeling? And usually that's the best skill you can learn.
That sounds like that might really sort of be the thing that helps resolve or remove the negative aspects of a lot of these things, right? Because
absolutely,
when we just put ourselves in the other person's shoes, think about them and their experience, that can then give us an appreciation for what they're going through without having to take away from our side of the picture.
Yes, my experience is that this is, for most people, not for everybody, but for most people, this is a skill people can learn. People who are injured, people who are insensitive, people who are insecure will often immediately feel a comment as a criticism about themselves. And I think what's important for them to learn is to not take it necessarily as a criticism, or even if it's meant as a criticism, to be able to step back and to be able to feel the other person's pain. Of course, I'm not talking about just criticism, but in a case where somebody is hurting. When somebody is hurting and they're sharing with you their hurt, and instead of wondering whether you are to be blamed for it or not, forget about that piece. Focus on the part of what that person has experienced and that has hurt them. And I've learned that that is actually a skill you can teach a lot of people. There are some people who you can't teach that to, unfortunately, and that's sad because how it affects a relationship. But in most relationships, with effort and with focus, people can actually learn that skill over time, to stop putting themselves, their own fears, in the middle of every interaction.
Okay, just to wrap things up with the marriage version of the question that we wrapped up with last time, I don't know if we can even ask this anymore. I feel like you might have already done this, but if you had to pick the number one most important or impactful or just your favorite piece of advice for people with regard to marriage, what would it be?
If you own a fancy car and you own a fancy computer, sometimes it doesn't act the way you want it to. You take it to a professional to get some advice. Going to a professional for advice, or going to anybody for advice, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Anything which is sophisticated, anything which is worthwhile, it's worthwhile also, whether you have to pay or you have to be uncomfortable. Don't be afraid to get outside advice or outside help with your relationship, because often there are solutions and help to a relationship, and the fact that you don't know what they are or you don't find the way out of the problem by yourself doesn't mean there isn't help for your relationship.
I have to say that wasn't what I was expecting, but perhaps I should have been.
Exactly.
Thank you very, very much. Wow, that was a very, very insightful conversation. Really appreciate your time once again.
Thank you.
And your expertise and your insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure to be here today. And thank you very much, and the staff who put this all together. Pleasure doing this.